So the first question that I want to bring to your attention, I'm sure you already know what is currently happening in Zambia, the back and forth between the government and the Lungu family and the AF party. We barely talk about politics, yes, but I'm sure your contribution to this matter can bring a bit of light and can shed more light to those who are stuck in between the political parties they belong to. Because what is really creating a rift between Zambians at the moment is the fact that others if are pledging their loyalty to HH, others their loyalty to the former president Edgar Lungu. So their judgment is kind of delusioned and their judgment is kind of skewed based on who they support and who they are rooting for. That's why they are having a challenge coming to a conclusion that is best for the nation. But every argument is based on who they support, who they like, and who they root for. So in this matter, let's just scrape the surface. Where do you think President Lungu should be buried? Where should he be buried and why?
President Lungu should be buried in Zambia. And here is why. Because he's a former head of state in Zambia. When you become a head of state, in some way, you belong to the state. So what is happening here is we have a family, which is the Lungu family, which is, in my view, influenced by a political party, which is PF. That causes a problem in that the PF party, instead of persuading the Lungu family, they are egging the Lungu family to pull away or to be at loggerheads with HH as a person. Because the personal grievance here is not with the Zambian people per se. It is neither with the party that HH represents, but it's a personal tiff between what they say Lungu stood for and what HH stood for. These personal differences should be put aside. And when the personal differences are put aside, a national concern, which is there at this stage, is to bury a former president. Why PF comes up and starts creating all these scenarios is perhaps to have this as a springboard for a political campaign. So to have these divisions that are dividing the nation instead of uniting the nation at this time in their mourning and in their grief, they should stand together and bury their former head of state, whether they loved him or loathed him. They should stand together at this time and bury a head of state, which is Lungu. If for any reason Lungu is buried in South Africa, as what PF is suggesting, and saying and hiding under this family, that the family, this is the family's desire. What is actually the family's desire? Does the family desire to have him buried in South Africa, or the family desires to have him buried in Zambia minus the presence of HH? When you dig deep, you will find that the family wants him buried in Zambia, albeit a private ceremony. This is not new to us as Zimbabweans. We saw this happening in Zimbabwe when Robert Mugabe died. He died in Singapore. He was brought back to Zimbabwe. There was a tiff between what was what was viewed as the family of the president, saying we don't want him buried at the National Heroes Acre. And the reason why they refused him burial, that they refused for him to be buried at the Heroes Acre, is because they had a difference with the current president, Emerson Mnangagwa, which was a personal thing. It was not national, it is personal. So these heads of state are not the same as you and I, Prof. They're not the same. They are accorded a different status as head of state. There is something within each nation's constitution that allows for these people to be set apart as heads of state and buried in a certain way with dignity and the necessary salutation that goes with that, the necessary recognition that goes with that, the military gun salutes and all that, a state-accorded funeral, a state funeral. So what is a state funeral? You then find that a state funeral is something that will be headed by the head of state. So what they don't want is they don't want HH coming in to head this. But constitutionally, they cannot say, we don't want you there, but we want the state funeral. So they can have a private funeral then, but bury Lungu in Zambia. You cannot, these guys from the PF cannot now want to put Lungu in exile in his death for political reasons that they think would springboard their political party back into power, with the promise here that they are giving, which a lot of people are missing. They are saying Lungu would be then brought back. Once the PF party wins, they'll bring Lungu back and bury him in Zambia. What's the point? Just bury him in Zambia. They are eating away at the dignity of a man that deserves to be buried with dignity. Right now, he's lying in a mortuary in South Africa. It's undignified. And again, I think South Africa is making a mess of this by actually entertaining this sort of thing. They should have just said, well, we have no jurisdiction to actually be bringing this. I know that in South Africa, it was actually the Zambian government that went to prevent the burial of Lungu in South Africa by taking them to court. Imagine this. You and your family have a dispute over how to bury, and then you go next door and say, I'll bury this person next door. And the neighbors entertain that. The neighbors should be the ones saying, no, this is not our business. This is Zambian business. And Zambia is a sovereign. And as a sovereign, you guys must go there and deal with this issue yourselves. South Africa should have said, should have not even entertained this in South African courts. Right now, we have Dudula in South Africa there. People are actually removing people that are leaving and saying you don't belong here. Why are they giving this guy space to be buried in a place that's not his, where he's got all this land that he can be buried in his own Zambia? He's a Zambian. Let's not deny him that honor. As an African, as a Pan-Africanist, as a person that comes from Southern Africa, I think it's a shame.
The family, apparently, the Lungu family, doesn't have a problem with President Lungu being buried in Zambia. They just don't want His Excellence President HH to be present. How can that be resolved?
They just have to go and deal with the burial. Let's deal with these other personal grievances that we have. We're still living. The living should not use the dead to fight. Basically, that's the start and end of it. The living should not use the dead as a tool in their fight. So what they simply need to do, bury him and sort out your differences later. We have seen this even in a micro environment within the family, that we have people that are actually saying, this man had a second wife, a third wife, and a girlfriend, and the other ones are saying, we don't want the girlfriend to come here. But that girlfriend was part of this dead person's life. They want to come and pay their respects. Whether you like them or not, allow them to come and pay their respects. Continue with your fight later, but for that day, in that period of mourning, let's not fight. Let's bury. What is mourning and what is burial? We are there for one purpose: to put someone to rest. Let's put someone to rest. If we have personal differences, let's put our differences aside for that moment, and afterwards we can pick up our own fights. We are still here to fight.
Okay. The Constitution of Zambia states that in the case of the former president of Zambia, President Lungu, it states that if someone rejoins politics, and I'm sure you know, every former president is entitled to benefits. And
yes,
President Lungu had rejoined politics, and the Constitution or the law stripped him of all those benefits simply because he became active again in politics. So he was eating deals from his pockets. The government was no longer looking after Lungu. He was taking care of his private matters as a private citizen. So now that he is gone,
it does not excuse him from being a former head of state. And by virtue of being former head of state, he's supposed to be accorded a state funeral. That does not excuse him. Personal issues aside, the issue here is these people in PF and the family are letting emotion cloud their judgment. The judgment of this issue is not clear. They don't have a clarion vision of this. We can go back to the same Lungu, because I believe it was President Lungu that was in power when Kenneth Kaunda died. Kenneth Kaunda's family might have wished for him to be buried alongside his wife, but then they were persuaded not to and bury him where these former heads of state are designated to be buried. So it is the same Lungu that convinced the family of Kaunda to bury Kaunda away from their family farm and in that place that they've set aside to bury their leaders. Now, these guys are trying to weaponize a corpse for political reasons, political expediency. It doesn't make any sense. The nation is mourning. It is a national figure. Love him or loathe him as Zambians, he was your president. And presidents, even according to the Zambian constitution, there's a protocol that needs to be followed when a president dies. So the family can say they disagree with HH, but they should follow the protocol and procedures that have always been there. They were put there for a reason. Why are they saying, oh, because he removed state facilities for Lungu? That's personal. That's not national. That's not a national thing. They can always fight about this later. But for now, the people of Zambia deserve to see their former president buried in their land. They have a period of mourning. They go through that mourning period. They are our brothers. They are our sisters. We've gone through something similar. But we resolved our things. Even anyone that knows Zimbabwe, any right-thinking Zimbabwean would say it was right for Robert Mugabe to be buried in Zimbabwe. Was it right for him to be buried in his rural home? Many might disagree and say, this man is the one that taught us what the hero's acre is, but he's not there. Well, they took it personal. They are national issues. They are personal issues. This is a family taking matters into their own hands and saying, we're making it personal to a person that actually should belong to all of us, as to all Zambians, as a statesman, as a leader of government at one point, as a head of state, as a head of the military and every other organization and organ that was in Zambia. He was a president. Why take him away now and want to make him private? Yet he was a public figure.
No, we understand you saying that they should not get their emotions, feelings, or make this personal. But based on the history of these two, President HH and President Lungu, there's a lot that has happened between the two of them. They were not really good friends politically. They've done things.
Those are personal issues. Let me give you an example. Let me give you an example. Right now, Joe Biden and Trump are not friends. These guys have had a big political fight, and Trump won. Joe Biden is probably in the sunset of his life. When Joe Biden dies, Trump, the very guy that was calling him Sleepy Joe, this, and insulting him throughout the campaign, will be the one spearheading the whole process of a head of state, a former president. Joe Biden is always going to be President Joe Biden. Barack Obama is always going to be President Barack Obama. This is something different from what we are calling in our culture, in our tradition, and these are people that are now operating at what we are calling a state level. This is what politics is about. The statesmanship and their head of states, they behave differently. There's something, a protocol that is set for each nation. Imagine tomorrow, God forbid, Barack Obama is said to have just died, and then Kenya says, we will take him, we'll bury him in Kenya. Americans will be up in arms. They'll say, no, you can't do that. This is the same thing that Zambians should be saying to South Africa. They should be saying to South Africa, you cannot bury our president in your land. He didn't die in exile. He went for medical attention, died there. It's a different thing when you talk about someone that went into exile. Uganda had a president that was Idi Amin. He died somewhere in Saudi Arabia, he's buried there, but he was in exile. But why put Lungu into exile in death, and then say when we are free, when we are free of HH, we'll bring him back? Why hold the nation to ransom? This, to me, has some criminal element to it. There's something that you're manipulating a situation of grief. It's not right.
So are you saying the family of Lungu? Are you saying the family of Lungu doesn't have a say as to where their father
do have a say.
Or husband should be buried?
They do have a say. But what national interest trumps family interest? This is not an ordinary man. This is not a guy that was just a school teacher somewhere. No, he's a president. He's a president of a nation, former president. So there's protocol that needs to be followed.
So
but they are now saying They do have a say
as to where President Lungu should be buried.
They do have a say, but their say is not any heavier than that of the nation. The nation here, Lungu belongs to Zambia before he belongs to the family because of him being a former head of state. This is the truth of the matter. But the family is making it difficult out of this. And unfortunately, the PF, the party that Lungu belonged to, is now using this as a springboard to try and besmirch President HH. I have no political affiliation or support for either Lungu or Lungu's former party or HH's party. I have not Zambian. I'm talking without emotion, with clarity, and without partisan connections here. So let's not make this a party political. Zambians should not make this a party political thing. They should make it a national thing. This is this is where the difference is.
I'm saying, so what the government says goes.
No, it's not. You see what PF is going to be doing here. They don't say government. They are personalizing it to saying HH. It's now an individual. This is why when a president speaks, right? The president is two people in one. There's the person of the president, and then there's the head of state. This is why when they speak, when they have a speech, I had the privy to seeing some of speeches that presidents write. They start off by saying, as head of state of government and in my personal capacity. That means as head of state as head of state, HH is obliged to pass a message of condolence, to lead and do everything that is necessary for the burial of the former president. In his personal capacity, he might have chosen that I didn't like this guy, I don't want to do this. But he's not obliged to say, in my personal capacity, I don't want to do this, because he has to act as head of state and not in his personal capacity. But however, I wanted to make that clarity and that division, that even when they speak, they would say, in my personal capacity and in my capacity as head of state. So that means they're splitting this one person into two. There's a personal side of HH and there's a president in that. He's a president to all Zambians. Those that love him, those that loathe him, those that hate him, those that like him. All of them, as long as you are Zambian, you have President HH at the moment. And all those that loved Lungu or hated Lungu, he was still their president. They have that right as a nation to mourn and see one of their own who led them buried on their own soil, into their own soil, in their own country. South Africa shouldn't even be entertaining this whole thing.
So if the family doesn't want HH to be present, is it possible for HH to send his delegation, his VP or any representative?
There's protocol. The family cannot come and say, let's change the way things are. I told you the example of the Kaunda family. It was Lungu who was president. They never changed the rules. Why change the rules now? This sets a wrong precedent, because now people, of course, if they say, ultimately what I want is for Lungu to be buried in Zambia. Whether the family says they're going to bury him in secret and in private, as long as he's buried in Zambia and not in South Africa, and not for a political party to then start using that as a springboard for their political campaign and now say, when we get into power. So you see, they're already using this mourning period as a campaign period. At this time, it's supposed to be gloves off. Let's all hug, let's all comfort each other, let's bury the dead. And then after that, we put the gloves back on and party politicking starts again. But they are politicking and party politicking at a time of grief.
If you're given an opportunity to advise President HH at this moment, what would you tell him?
Stick to your guns. Stick to protocol.
And Lungu's family and PF party?
PF party should stop influencing the Lungu party, the Lungu family, for political expedience or political gain. They should not use this to gain political traction and political mileage. It is very low of them to do that.
In the family?
Which family now? The family should do what's in the interest of Zambia. They should know that this man was not their own. He belonged to all of Zambia. That's why he was president. They can do this, they can choose how to bury any other member of their family how they want, but not this one, because this one was the president. The president can come down and say, okay, you do what you want. Because a state funeral, what does it mean to have a state funeral? It means he's given full honors befitting of a former president. When you do it in this means he's given a military procession, he's given a 21-gun salute, he's given all that protocol. Where he's buried can be a choice of the family, but the protocol of having a head of state preside over another head of state, former or albeit former and late, the president still needs to preside over it. So the family has a problem with that, but that's personal. And we need to focus on national interest here and not personal issues.
Okay, analyzing this from a political point of view, do you think if, let's say, the government of South Africa rules in favor of the family, that former President Lungu can be buried in South Africa for the meantime, do you think it could be a very powerful political move for them to repatriate his remains during election times? Do you think it can give them political points?
That's what they're playing at. That's what they're playing at. And I'm saying it's a very low thing for PF to do. They cannot use Lungu in his death to continue campaigning for their party to come back into power.
Okay,
so
wait,
the leaders
I'm not looking at it. I'm not looking at it from a moral perspective. I'm asking if this can be a political card that gives them leverage in winning elections. If they are to repatriate his remains during the time of elections,
this is what they are hoping for. This is what they are hoping for. But here's the issue. The issue here is right now, the elections are probably in 2026, and this period, mourning has to go from a period to a period, and then they say officially it's ended, which I guess by now it has ended before the guy has been buried. Now, when Zambia has mourned their president, Lungu, and then they've come to a point of saying, now they're getting over it. Then you start telling us that on the 26th, the day after the election, we'll start repatriating. That means we get into another period of mourning. So it's going to be mourned twice. For what reasons? For the reasons of political benefit and getting political mileage from a corpse. Morally, you cannot separate the morality here. Morally, it's wrong.
But if it gives them power, then why not?
Well, it might not. And then what? They go to this election, HH wins again. Then what? You're going to wait till when? They might never come back into power. And then they just bring him back anyway. What are they going to do? I can tell you this. Zimbabwe is Zambia's neighbor, and we've gone through this not once. There was a leader that was there that was called Ian Smith. Ian Smith led Rhodesia. He's the one that declared in 64 unilateral declaration of independence, separating the white Rhodesians that were there from British rule. Ian Smith died in 1997. Or I think it was 2007. He died at 88. He died in South Africa. But when he died, he was not accorded a state funeral. But he died in South Africa. He got cremated in South Africa, and they repatriated his ashes and scattered them on his farm in Shurugu. So effectively speaking, he died in South Africa, but still got scattered, technically buried in Zimbabwe. That was the land that he grew up on. That was where he was. From birth, all through his career, he led Zimbabwe, he led Rhodesia, which is now present-day Zimbabwe. And he's buried in Zimbabwe. He's not literally, there's no grave, but his ashes, his remains were scattered on his farm. Robert Mugabe is buried in his homestead in Zambia. He died in Singapore. They repatriated his body. There was a national funeral, albeit the family refused for him to be buried at the National Heroes Acre, opting for him to be buried in his home. The nation of Zimbabwe, the state of Zimbabwe, even built a mausoleum that is at the National Heroes Acre that Mugabe never used. Because the family chose for him to be. Imagine if they were to say that Mugabe was to be buried in Singapore out of Zimbabwe. Any right-thinking Zimbabwean, whether you loved or hated Mugabe, you'd think it's correct to bury Mugabe in Zimbabwe. I think it's correct to bury Edgar Lungu in Zambia, whether he's buried in his home, at the back of his garden, or wherever the family chooses. But as long as he's buried in Zambia, that's what really matters.